Hi, friends. This is Lisa Don Lashwa. I'm the owner and the creator of the company Tapping Into It, and I'm super excited to talk to you. This is my audio blog for this week, and I have a couple of topics that I want to talk to you about, which I think would be really important. And the first conversation I want to have and content I want to share that I think would be valuable to you is really the truth of vulnerability and what it does in our lives. And, why do people avoid that? Why do we really dislike being vulnerable? What's the problem with vulnerability that makes many of us run and flee? And what is the power of vulnerability that creates an element of transformation and truth? And how vulnerability can help us in our lives each day. The topic, in itself is risque, let's say. Lots of us are talking about vulnerability, and, there's some amazing authors out there that have shared the word of vulnerability at another perspective level of imperfection, of self worth, and analyzing how vulnerability helps us to face and address our imperfections and our own worth. And that how to rise from that experience. But my take on vulnerability is truly not from an emotional perspective for this conversation anyways. There's different variables around vulnerability. There's different ways to viewpoint the whole conversation about what vulnerability is. And I want to talk to you about the power of vulnerability and why people avoid it so much, what it creates. What's the truth that we can step into that will bring us to those transformations when we embrace vulnerability in a unique and personally designed way. So each person has an element of vulnerability. Every single person has something that they're vulnerable for emotionally or with emotionally. And then there's just true vulnerability in our physical stratosphere, in our DNA chain, what comes from our family. We have vulnerabilities around different illnesses or different possibilities because our whole family. Then we have the epigenetics, which is around, our entire line and history. Then we have the vulnerability of just being in this planet and what other people are co-creating in this reality. Then we have the vulnerability of, what we chose from a spiritual perspective and what our soul wants to do. And as a person, how do you handle that? How do we deal with that? Then we have the vulnerability of the jobs we choose or the areas that we work, the vulnerability of being happy, of not being happy, of feeling kind of enslaved to or encompassed by the structure around us, where you're from and how that puts you in a vulnerable position, depending on your circumstances. Like a family, some people are born into money and some people aren't. And the vulnerability of not having money is different than the vulnerability of having money, as an example, coming from a well-adjusted home, or the vulnerability of coming through abuse. So this whole idea of vulnerability is pretty wide. There's also the personal vulnerability of, really sharing who you are with the world around you, and the risks involved in that. So in this conversation, vulnerability is about, where are you vulnerable? Where and what's happening in your life that's a real vulnerability. There are certain areas where we are vulnerable, and by facing them and embracing them, we can find the power in those areas of our life. We can find the way through the vulnerability of truth. And it's very important for me, this conversation, because it's in our vulnerability of telling the truth that we can absolutely transform the possibilities of turning that vulnerability into our voice, into who we are, into our actions, into seeing other avenues in our life experience. So my personal experience, which is, when I think of it, there was definitely a time that vulnerability would not have been in my vocabulary, where I was, I had been and felt like I was vulnerable enough growing up in a very violent and abusive family. in a variety of ways. And I know so many people suffer from that. And there's a vulnerability in growing up feeling unloved, unsupported, and in an atmosphere of abuse. There's a deep vulnerability to a child growing up in that experience. And it's through me being able to understand how that influenced me that I found my voice and my way through it. Because it's through being able to say, and share with myself the vulnerability of, I have been abused and that has impacted my life, that I was able to step into another place of voice and truth. So that's a kind of example of what it means to use vulnerability as your voice and your truth, to hear your own story, to hear your own reality around where you've been vulnerable in your life and what makes you vulnerable and what makes you feel vulnerable. They're different. What might make us feel vulnerable is not necessarily what is making us vulnerable. Vulnerability has such a variety of textures and emotions and energies and realities that you want to be clear. Vulnerability is something that you can embrace, and you want to split it up into sections in your life so that it becomes more palpable and more digestible, to be able to say, okay, here's the areas of my life where I have an element of vulnerability. And like I said, there's a variety of ways to embrace vulnerability and the power of it and why we're even afraid of it. So there's levels and layers. So when you're facing your own vulnerabilities as a person and embracing them as a powerful place of truth and voice for yourself, it's important to understand what's making you feel vulnerable and where the vulnerability comes from. Is it real? Is it factual? Is it emotional? Is it your belief system that's saying you're vulnerable to these things? There was a time for me where, and tons of my clients go through this, and so many people I've met in the world of my business that, we're afraid to say we love somebody that deeply and completely. We're afraid to not have love. We're afraid to not be loved. We're afraid not to experience that whole emotional journey and of passion and possibility of trust and truth, and how we can find someone and feel like that is our purpose and our passion in life, and that love is so delicious and wonderful. And so many of us feel vulnerable towards that happening as much as we feel vulnerable towards it not happening. And that's an interesting point of view to look at. In all honesty, like, we are vulnerable on both sides, and the feeling can be exactly the same. I'm vulnerable. I'm in a relationship. I'm terrified to share who I am with that person, because what if they don't love me anymore? Just like I'm never going to find somebody to share love with. And what if I can't find somebody to share love with, and no one will ever love me? They're almost parallel, the same emotional experience. Because if you believe you're vulnerable to love, or if you believe that you're not going to be loved the way you are, then you would have that same emotional reaction to two different experiences, one having a relationship of love and one not having it. But the same belief will pull itself forward. So vulnerability comes from the places inside yourself, the compartments of you that have beliefs and ideas and concepts that may not be actually truths, but that may be beliefs that you have about yourself inside that create this texture of vulnerability, that create this sensation of, this is risky, this is scary, I don't know how I'm going to handle it, I don't know what I'm going to do. So we tend to misunderstand what vulnerability is and often avoid it, like many of my clients have, and I definitely have as well throughout my life, especially when I was younger. I didn't want anyone to know I had any weaknesses or any sense of vulnerabilities. I didn't want people to know I loved them, because love hurt me when I was very young. The longing for love hurt me. The natural feelings that I grew up in, wanting to be important and wanting to be loved by others, were not there. They were stripped away because I was surrounded by people that were not capable of doing that. And when you're young, that's what shapes us. And there's so many children and so many people that are being given beliefs that really put them in vulnerability, even though it might be a false sense of safety and security. Like when I was a kid, being brave and bravado and courageous, it wasn't real because deep down inside, that wasn't truly what I felt. What I really felt inside my heart was I wanted to be loved and I wanted to be important to people. But I didn't know that. And telling myself this true vulnerability was very, very difficult to say because of the feeling that it gave me and what I would have to face. So the truth and the voice of vulnerability will tell you who you truly are and will tell you for the good or for the bad who you really are and who you truly are and what you need to do. And it's important. It's truly important for us to understand that the vulnerability of seeking the voice and seeking the truth of who we are inside allows us to build a new framework where vulnerability becomes our power tool of release, of freedom, of power, of possibility, of understanding who we are and true self-acceptance of who we are and what's happened in our lives. It's through the experience of vulnerability and telling ourselves, what is it that I really long for and seek? How do I really feel and experience the things around me, you know? So there's such a variety of ways to look at vulnerability. And in this case, like I said, I'm trying to express the power of vulnerability because it's very important in this blog, that this audio blog, that you walk away saying, maybe my vulnerability has a truth inside of it that's really important to me, finding the power of who I am and the power of my life and what to do to help myself or to serve the people around me or to find that passionate career that I want, or to find the love of my life, or to open myself up to the true desire I have to travel around the world, or go back to school, or just say yes to myself and start building that empire or that business or that entrepreneurship or that new career change, or you know feeling more confident, finding more clarity about who I am. It's through that journey of truth seeking and hearing our own inner voice of vulnerability that will allow for us to seek the answers and the solutions to our life challenges within who we are and without in the outside world as well. Vulnerability is truly the voice that lives inside of us, that allows us to rise, that allows us to hear who we really are, and to stop pretending that we're something that we're not. And it allows us to have a safe, comfortable place to nurture our hearts and nurture our minds and nurture our experiences, past, present, and future, with the right flavor and texture so that we can feel like it's palpable. It's like we can turn pain into pleasure. We can turn vulnerability into our voice and our truth. And we can also turn our vulnerabilities into the place of reason and a place where we can understand what we need and what we want and if we can have it or if we can't. It's very important to understand that, you see, because in your own vulnerability, you can tell yourself the truth into a place of clarity that allows you to take your deepest pain and recognize the truth in the pain so that you don't feel like you're blaming yourself anymore, or the things that you wish you could do that you can't do. You can accept them with peace and truth and know that it's okay that maybe you can't do that because of your circumstances or your situations, or you know it might not be the right thing in your life at this time, but that you can move forward and find out what it is that you truly are capable of doing, and that will serve your highest good and who you are, and allow you to rise into a place of power, into a place of, I know who I am. And from knowing who you are, you allow yourself to be in the vulnerability of sharing through your own voice and your own truth who that is. And who you are matters the most. And how you share who you are with the world around you matters the most. You know, What I learned many, many years ago was that our false sense of reality, and in particular my own, what I wasn't willing to tell myself because it made me feel so, so very vulnerable. When I became willing to tell myself those truths, they became life-changing for me. They became freedom. They became my way into rising into who I was truly meant to be in my heart and soul, or what I was possibly meant to be in my heart and soul. Because when we say this term truly meant to be, it's so expansive. I mean, I'm truly meant to be who I am, and there's even more of me that's not even tapped. I haven't even tapped into that yet. So every time we tell ourselves a truth through the vulnerability process, and we allow ourselves to say, this is who I really am, and this is what really happened to me. I was really abused. I really do want to be this person who's creating something massive and wonderful in the world, or I just want to be in a simple lifestyle, or I want to understand my soul and I don't, or what happened to me when I was growing up completely shaped me in a negative way, or the hidden secrets that you have inside from your life experiences, and you need to share them and you're not. You need to find someone to help you and you're not. Whatever your story is, whatever has happened that you're hiding from yourself because it makes you feel that the texture of vulnerability and the ripping apart of your courage and the breaking down of your ego and putting you in this place of innocence and fear and unknown. What's going to happen if I tell myself that truth? What's going to happen if I'm really vulnerable? What happens when you're really vulnerable is freedom, and your voice and your truth are on the other side of it. So you got this. You can do it. If you're struggling and you don't like vulnerability and you don't like feeling like anything has any power over you, know that what you avoid and what is your truth has power over you if you're not vulnerable enough with yourself to tell yourself that this is what's living inside me. This is what I'm telling myself in my subconscious reality. This is what I long for. Allow yourself to say, I love you, even though it makes you terrified to tell someone how much you care about them, or even to yourself. I have a dream. Tell yourself what your dream is. Even if it feels impossible, it's through that truth telling that you will allow for a deeper sense of freedom. If you can tell yourself, I'm terrified of people seeing my vulnerability. I'm just really scared to expose myself. Then do it with yourself. Because even if you open the door to your vulnerabilities with self, they completely will begin the process of transformation. They will begin to become your voice and your truth in a very impactful way. I hope this has helped, and I appreciate you listening. And your vulnerability is your voice. Your vulnerability is your truth. You don't have to announce who you are to the world, but you certainly will make a huge difference in your own life if you announce to yourself where your vulnerabilities lie in every level, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and mentally, mindfully. What you say and expose about your own vulnerabilities will allow you to rise and be powerful and strong in your life choices and in your freedom, internally and externally. Enjoy your wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.